He was lying in the mud, deep inside the Bolivian Amazon, barely conscious, covered in infected wounds, when he saw her, a woman, standing at the edge of the jungle, watching him. He called out to her. She didn't speak, but she didn't leave either. And in that moment, something shifted inside him. He wasn't going to die here. Not in front of her, not while she was watching. He got up. He started moving again. The problem was, she wasn't real. His brain had invented her, built her out of nothing. From the raw material of starvation and desperation and 3 weeks of total isolation, and placed her there in the jungle because it had calculated something extraordinary, that a man fighting for himself is weaker than a man fighting for someone else. This is the true story of Yossi Ghinsberg, an Israeli adventurer who disappeared into the uncharted Bolivian Amazon in 1981 and spent 19 days alone before his friend found him on a riverbank, barely recognizable as human. But this isn't just a survival story. This is a story about what the brain does when isolation becomes so severe that it begins to rewrite reality itself, just to give you a reason to keep going. Yossi Ghinsberg was 22 years old, Israeli, former Navy, restless. He had just finished his military service and wanted to see the world, not the tourist version, the real thing. He had read a book called Papillon, the story of a man who escaped Devil's Island, who refused to be destroyed by any environment, no matter how hostile. That book lit something in Yossi that wouldn't go out. He wanted to be tested. He wanted to know what he was made of. He made it to Bolivia, and in La Paz, he met a man named Karl Ruprechter. Karl said he was an Austrian geologist. He said he knew the Amazon. He said he knew where gold was. He said he knew of indigenous tribes that had never seen outsiders. He was convincing, he was charismatic, and almost everything he said was a lie. Yossi didn't know that yet. He only knew that here was a man offering him exactly what he'd come looking for. The real thing. He said yes. The group was 4 people. Yossi, Karl, Kevin Gale, an American photographer, Marcus Stamm, a Swiss teacher. They left civilization behind, trekking deep into the Bolivian Amazon, along the Tuichi River, into territory that local people had warned them not to enter. At first, it was extraordinary. The jungle was everything Yossi had imagined. Ancient, vast, alive with things he'd never seen. But Karl's promises began unraveling quickly. The indigenous tribe he'd promised never materialized. The gold was nowhere. The food ran out faster than planned, and Karl, the supposed expert, was making decisions that made no sense. Locals they encountered on the river looked at Karl with something Yossi couldn't read. Fear. Recognition. Something. The group began to fall apart. Marcus got sick. His feet were infected. He could barely walk, and the jungle ahead of them stretched on without end. Tensions broke into arguments. Arguments broke into something uglier. They were lost, running out of food. And their guide was not who he claimed to be. They split up. Marcus and Karl would go on foot. Yossi and Kevin would build a raft and navigate the Tuichi River downstream. It was meant to be the safer option. It was not. The raft hit a section of white water. The river narrowed. The current accelerated without warning, and before either of them fully understood what was happening, the raft was out of control. It hit a rock. The force threw Yossi into the water. He was swept downstream in seconds. He tried to grab anything, rocks, roots, anything. The river took him anyway. When he finally dragged himself onto the bank, breathless and bleeding, Kevin was gone. The raft was gone. He was alone on the bank of the Tuichi River, deep inside the Bolivian Amazon, with no food, no supplies, no way to signal for help, and no idea which direction led out. Before we go further into what happened to Yossi, we need to understand what isolation actually does to the human mind. Because most people think the danger of being alone in the wilderness is physical. Starvation, thirst, exposure, and those things are real. But psychologists who study extreme survival cases have identified something that kills faster than any of them. It is the absence of human connection. The human brain evolved over hundreds of thousands of years, in groups. It was never designed to operate alone. When it is forced into total isolation, it begins to malfunction. First comes anxiety, then hypervigilance, hearing threats in every sound, then paranoia, then, in cases of prolonged isolation, the brain begins to hallucinate. Not because it is broken, but because it is trying to fix itself. It is trying to restore the one thing it cannot function without: another presence. Researchers call this the third man factor. It has been documented in mountaineers stranded on Everest, in solo sailors crossing the Atlantic, in polar explorers cut off from their teams, in prisoner of war accounts from solitary confinement. In almost every case of extreme, prolonged isolation, survivors describe the same thing: a presence, a companion, something, or someone that wasn't physically there, but felt absolutely real. And in almost every case, that presence saved their life, because it gave them something to fight for. That wasn't themselves. Yossi walked. He had no choice but to walk. The river was his only reference point. He followed it. Days passed. Food was whatever the jungle offered. Berries he wasn't sure were safe. Small animals when he could catch them. The jungle floor. The constant wet. The noise that never stopped. His feet became infected. His skin began breaking down in the constant humidity. Fungal infections spread across his body. The heat during the day was suffocating. And at night, the sounds. Things moving through the darkness that he could hear but not see. One night, he saw eyes, low to the ground, reflecting the faint moonlight. A jaguar, watching him from the tree line. He grabbed the only thing he had, a can of insect repellent. He held his lighter to the nozzle, and he pointed a jet of flame at the jaguar. It worked. The animal disappeared into the darkness. But Yossi knew it hadn't gone far, and he knew he couldn't stay awake forever. Day after day, the starvation worsened. His mind began to drift. Thoughts came that he couldn't control. Memories, faces, his mother, his friends, and then the woman. He didn't know exactly when she first appeared. That was the nature of it. She didn't announce herself. She was simply there, standing at the edge of his vision, present, watching. He described her as a young woman. He didn't know who she was. He didn't recognize her from his real life, but she felt familiar, warm. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence alone changed something in him. And here is where this story becomes one of the most psychologically extraordinary survival accounts ever recorded. Because Yossi didn't just feel comforted by her presence. He felt responsible for her. When he thought about stopping, about lying down and not getting up, he thought about her. He couldn't leave her there. He couldn't abandon her in the jungle. He had to keep moving. For her, his brain had done something remarkable. It had taken his deepest survival drive, the drive to protect others, and applied it to a person it had invented from nothing. Because it knew something his conscious mind didn't fully understand yet. That Yossi fighting for himself was not enough. But Yossi fighting for someone else might just be. Neuroscientists who have studied the third man factor have found something striking. The phenomenon is not random. It doesn't appear in all isolation cases. It appears most frequently in people who have strong existing attachments to others. People who care deeply about those around them. People for whom human connection is a core part of their identity. The brain doesn't manufacture a companion for everyone. It does it for people who are wired to respond to companions. Yossi was that kind of person. He later described his deepest fear in the jungle, not as death, but as dying without having contributed something to the world, without having mattered to anyone, without having protected anyone. The brain read that blueprint, and it built him exactly what he needed: a person to protect, a reason to arrive somewhere, a purpose that stretched beyond simple survival. This is what separates the third man factor from ordinary hallucination. It is not random noise from a breaking mind. It is the brain's most sophisticated survival mechanism. Creating meaning. When meaning is the only thing left. Kevin Gale had not given up. After the raft separated them, Kevin had eventually made it to a small riverside settlement. He was exhausted, starving, but he didn't stop. He organized a search. He found local indigenous guides willing to go back up the river. He hired a motorized canoe, and for days, he searched the Tuichi River, calling Yossi's name into the jungle. Most people told him it was hopeless, that nobody survived alone in the Amazon that long. Kevin kept going anyway. Then one morning, on the riverbank, he saw something. A figure, barely standing. Skin covered in sores, clothes rotted to almost nothing. Weight dropped to the point of unrecognizability. Kevin shouted across the water, "Yossi." The figure turned and began walking toward the boat. After 19 days alone in the Bolivian Amazon, Yossi Ghinsberg was alive. When Kevin helped him into the canoe, Yossi reportedly looked around, as if searching for someone. The woman was gone. She had served her purpose, and she had vanished the moment he no longer needed her. Not everyone in this story survived. Karl Ruprechter and Marcus Stamm were never found. No bodies, no evidence, no explanation. Karl Ruprechter, the man who led them into the jungle, was later reported to have been wanted by Interpol. For what exactly has never been fully confirmed. The fate of 2 of the 4 men who entered the Bolivian Amazon in 1981 remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of survival history. Yossi recovered. He returned to Israel. He wrote a book, Back from Tuichi, about what happened. The story was eventually adapted into a 2017 film called Jungle, starring Daniel Radcliffe as Yossi. But Yossi didn't stop at telling his story. He went back to Bolivia. He worked with the indigenous communities along the Tuichi River. He built ecotourism programs that gave them economic independence. He gave back to the jungle that had almost taken him. Because that was who Yossi was. A person who couldn't survive just for himself, who needed to matter to others. The same trait that had nearly broken him was the same one that built a life worth living after. So what does Yossi's story tell us about the human brain? It tells us that the mind's most powerful survival tool is not physical. It is not strength. It is not endurance. It is connection, real or invented, present or imagined. The brain will do whatever it takes to provide that connection, because without it, survival loses its point. And when survival loses its point, the body follows. The Amazon has claimed thousands of lives. It is indifferent to strength, indifferent to experience, indifferent to will. But in 1981, a 22-year-old Israeli with no jungle experience survived 19 days inside it. Not because he was tougher than everyone else, but because his brain refused to let him be alone, even when he was the only person for miles in every direction. Even then, he wasn't really alone.
Enjoyed the video? Then please like and subscribe to the channel.